Welcome to De-Stress Your Business, the podcast where we show you how to get incredible results in your business without constant stress. I'm Alexis Kingsbury, a serial entrepreneur and founder at AirManual. Now today we're diving into a topic that, let's be honest, many business leaders find challenging, and that's navigating the vast sea of data to pinpoint the insights that truly matter. But here's the good news. My guest today, Sam Knowles, has mastered the art of data storytelling, turning cold numbers into captivating narratives. Now, Sam is the author of the best-selling Using Data Better trilogy. He's renowned for his unique approach to blending data and narrative storytelling, making it actionable and human. And he believes, and I wholeheartedly agree, that the right questions can uncover the insights that you need to propel your business forward and effectively remove those stressful bottlenecks. So in our chat today, you're going to be discovering the transformative power of asking smarter questions. We'll dive into Sam's 6 golden rules of data storytelling, and I'll be asking Sam to share some real-world examples that bring the power of data to life. So without further ado, let's dive in. Sam Knowles, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Alexis. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Yes, me too. So, Sam, let's start off. Tell me about your journey that led to you becoming a master of data storytelling, and what sparked your passion for combining data with stories.
So I started with story. So in secondary school, I was badly taught, perhaps with air quotes, mathematics and sciences. They were not my things. My things were languages, and particularly dead languages, classical languages. So for my A-levels at the middle of the 80s, I studied Latin and Greek and ancient history, went on to do a master's in classics originally, and fell in love with story and storytelling and story structure, what we can learn about the way that powerful both law court speeches, but also the dramatic forms of the day, comedy and tragedy and epic poetry, what they depend on. And Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, lived and worked most of his life in Athens, talks a lot in a very short, very readable, particularly in translation book called the Poetics, about the beginning, the middle, and the end, the 3-act story structure. He called it the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis. That's the way he looked at it. And I think there's a huge amount that we can learn. And any box set that we watch, any novel that we read, any Barbie movie that we may go and see, or Oppenheimer movie that we go and see, current at the time of our recording, they are powerful and persuasive because they follow the rules of story and storytelling and story structure. Where things fall down is where they don't. With some glorious exceptions like David Lynch, but let's not get down a David Lynch back avenue. So storytelling, I went out, I was my college newsletter editor at university. I was always writing. I had a couple of journalistic jobs before I went to university. And when I came out, I worked in communications agencies. What I found perplexing working in communications agencies in the 90s was there seemed to be very little curiosity about psychology, human motivation, and behavior. What I thought we were there to do was to persuade people to do things they hadn't realized they wanted to do until they'd stumbled across our brand or campaign or whatever. And so that part of that frustration got me to go and see a vocational psychologist who said that she thought, after doing the first of a round of psychometric tests that I'd ever really had, that I should study psychology. I liked a psychologist telling me I should study psychology. And I looked around and I thought, well, I'm prepared to go back to university. And already having a degree, I quite soon discovered I could go and do a master's. And I looked at the 3 best places to do a master's. One was Durham, one was Bristol, and one was Sussex. Sussex happened to be 4 miles up the road from a little house I'd bought in Lewes, East Sussex at the time. Still live in that town, but in a very different house. And so I applied. I applied to do this master's course, did the master's course, got on it, had to teach myself the first year's course, and imagine my surprise, delight, and terror having given up a well-paid job in a West End agency, moved out of London, never to be able to afford to return, to discover the first 2 hours of my new life were a statistics lecture. My bowels filled with ice. I was terrified, but I had brilliant statistics teachers who taught me how to use data to answer questions. And so along with English and Latin and Greek and Sanskrit and the other things I'd studied, I suddenly had this powerful new tool. I liked psychology very much. I liked what I got to learn about human motivation and behavior, and indeed have applied quite a lot of that in consultancy practice since, in terms of building models of motivated behavior change. But when I came back out, data was getting big. I came back out in 2004 or 5. So the Facebook had been born, Twitter was about to come along. And in communications agencies, I got a reputation for the guy who could look at the data. Many people in comms agencies, still to this day, particularly PR agencies, will run a million miles from data, right? They really don't want to be there at all. So I became the data guy. And just under 10 years ago, I set up a small boutique, high-value consultancy, Insight Agents, to this day, coming up to its 10th birthday in December. And we help all sorts of organizations make smarter use of data in the questions that they ask, in the insights that they articulate using the data that they've surfaced, and then in the human and empathetic stories that they tell. In a shorter answer, I could say I wouldn't start from here, or I wouldn't do it my way round. I've learned a lot of principles that I found that many businesses, particularly big businesses, but also SMEs, find to be very helpful in navigating through the maelstrom and the smog. Nobody ever says, I haven't got enough data. What they usually say is, I haven't got any insight into what the data might mean. And what they also say is, when our people open their mouths, they either don't use any data at all, or they drown their audience in data. Can you help? And the answer is yes. It's actually relatively straightforward.
Love that. I love that, and I think I love that split of, as you say, either people open their mouths and they're not using any data at all, and so what they've got is an opinion, often loudly held, or they share a lot of data and there's not a conclusion, a recommendation, or a decision to be made there. Right? It's just being shared and like, oh, isn't this interesting? And I think a lot of business leaders, as a result, feel that exasperation at that experience. As a result of your incredible journey that you've had and building up this wealth of experience, you then authored a trilogy of books on smarter use of data. Why 3 books? Like, most people barely get around to writing one. If they do write one, they're pretty surprised that they have, and they may or may not look forward to doing more. You've developed this trilogy. What was it that you felt like actually this needed to be broken out in this way, and what's the journey that trilogy would then take us on?
Well, it wasn't the plan at the start, but like all good narratives, you can look back and justify it. I can justify my being a data storyteller by doing these degrees in classics and psychology. I found as well. I did some work with a former client. He'd been head of comms at many UK PLCs. He became a bit of a mentor, and then a coach when he was training to be a coach when he exited in his early 50s. He said, "Would you mind if you were one of my guinea pigs as I trained to be a coach?" I said, "I'd be delighted." We get to meet 6 times a year, talk for an hour about me. Yeah, I'd be absolutely fine. Thanks very much, Tim. And one of the first things he did, one of the first things he said to me was, if you want to be known as the person who... He was very directive as an early coach. He's now much less directive. But as an early coach, he said, if you want to be known as the person for whom data storytelling is a thing, or one of the people, if you want to be an authority in this area, you've got to write the book. And that was the end of our first coaching session, and that was in 2014. It took me a while, but I got a book coach. I've been threatening to write books for years and years and years about comedy and all sorts of other things. My wife's probably got a list of all of the books I threatened to write. But I got a brilliant writing coach. She's a book whisperer. She's a marvelous woman called Dr. Beth Miller. She has a bookshelf in her house of books that she is the midwife of. And actually, it's now 2 shelves because she's good. And her advice was, if you're going to write, and that's about it. But it was a good one. So I determined that data storytelling was a thing. This was in 2018. It was published. I wrote it in 2017. It was a thing I wanted to codify and set down some of the principles. I mean, actually, in a very different way, but not dissimilar to your approach, right? To your approach in running AirManual. I didn't say I had the only way of telling stories with data, but I was frustrated by the fact that people either do all or nothing, and that trainers say we've had enough of data, or it's all about the data. But I was also frustrated that people confuse data visualization for data storytelling. I was
Nice.
talking earlier on today to a very senior guy at Gartner, the consultancy, and we had a riotous agreement on the fact that if there's no point playing around with Power BI or Tableau or even Excel to try and find the story if you don't actually know what the narrative is. So I wanted to set out some simple principles that were not a statistics lecture. I've given statistics lectures and they have a particular place, but not in business for sure. And so I wrote the first book and it did well, and it won some awards and it got some acclaim, and it sold pretty well. And my publisher said, "Oh, what's the next one?" And actually, so I started a training practice and a speaking practice. You'll be familiar with that, right? I started training practice, speaking practice on data storytelling, and still do a huge amount around that. But I call my business Insight Agents because I think, particularly in the world of marketing services, particularly big agencies, the word insight is tossed about like confetti. And for me, insight is a prized and special thing. And I was interested in it from the perspective of the history, the philosophy, the psychology, and increasingly the neuroscience. So I thought, well, there's a book about insight. Insight agents, insight, this abstract thing. Agents, get your nails down and dirty to actually surface these things. I mean, I define insight in the book as how to be insightful as a profound and useful understanding. It's profound because it answers the so what questions. What do the data mean? And then it allows you to go on to the now what should we do as a result. So number 2 came out. It was a pandemic baby. Well, it was born in the pandemic. Did actually pretty well in the pandemic. And the publisher came round again and said, "What's the next one going to be?" And I really didn't have a clue. And I thought I might write something about purpose. And then I went on a webinar where publishers were saying the last thing we think is another book about purpose. So I felt a bit chastened on that. And then I just kind of thought about it and realized that actually, if you don't know, if you want to get data to get insight, how do you get it? Well, you ask questions. Whether you're interrogating a big data database, whether you're running a police prosecution, whatever it might be. And so I thought, well, this is going to be the one. And they snapped it up, and it's. I confess in the introduction that I've written them in the wrong order, because my very small p philosophy is that if you want to make smart use of data as an individual, in a team, as an organization, ask the right questions to surface the right data. Once you have that data, you're then able to build data-rich, data-driven insights, these profound useful understandings. And then it's important to apply humanity and empathy and respect the data tolerance of your audience, and use a judicious human amount of data in your communication. So that's how the 3 came about. And there will be no more business books. There may be, there are online versions, there may be workbooks, but I think 3 is enough.
Nice. Well, I won't agree with that too heavily, because I think your writing style is excellent and the quality of your books is fantastic, as evidenced by the fantastic reviews and awards and so on. So I'm sure there might be another one at some point. But yeah, you'll have to start another trilogy, I suspect, unless you're going to go on full on Hollywood version of Tolkien and turn it into 5 and all this sort of thing. So, no, that's awesome. And I think one of the reasons why this is such an area of interest for so many business leaders is because, I think you're speaking to that sort of dichotomy of, you've got the 2 ends of this spectrum. You've got the promise of insight delivered through data, and the overwhelm and analysis paralysis that it can cause. Given that business leaders can often feel overwhelmed by it, like, what are the most common mistakes that business leaders make when they're trying to get those insights from the data?
I think there are 3. The first is accepting that data or casual observations or, heaven forfend, snapshots of dashboards are insights. That means they have too low bar a definition of what insight might be. Now, I'll make two references to Daniel Kahneman shortly, the Princeton psychologist. The favourite thing he's ever said to me, I'm a cat lover, I know that cats feature in your life too. He said that thinking is to humans as swimming is to cats. They can do it, but they prefer not to. And thinking about abstract concepts like insight is hard. So I think having too low bar a definition of insight and accepting things that aren't insights as insights can take businesses in a completely wrong direction. I think the second is a belief that evidence convinces, so that if we parade the scholarship, if we know a lot about something, we just need to tell people. And actually, Cognitive Psychology 101 tells us that is what gets people to put up a wall. And then I think the third thing, and this is to go back to Kahneman and the work that he did alongside his long-term collaborator Amos Tversky that got them the Nobel Prize for economics, but behavioral economics in 2002, is that we make our decisions irrationally and emotionally using the evolutionarily ancient parts of the brain that have no access to language, let alone data. We make our decisions quickly and emotionally. We justify them rationally using the uniquely human cerebral cortices that surround our brain like crenellated bark. And if you don't balance the emotional and the rational, and probably in that order, in your narrative, but you don't have elements of both, then you're missing a trick. So I think those are the three fails.
Yeah, and I can completely see how those both individually and particularly if you compound them lead to that problem, right? Of both the insight, inverted commas, that is delivered not really landing, and that being frustrating, but also not being able to really action what's being done. I think as you say, like one of the keys is asking the right questions, and that's something that you emphasize in the book, asking smarter questions, of which I have a copy, and I'm very grateful for it. But in that book, you emphasize the importance of asking those great questions and how that can make a difference. To kind of bring that to life, are you able to perhaps share an example where a business has been transformed by simply refining the questions that they've asked and making them smarter?
I can indeed. I mean, it's often not popular to talk about the tallest poppy, but I'm going to give the example of Tesco. And there was a time when they were very much not the tallest poppy, when they lagged Sainsbury's in the 70s and into the 80s by some distance. I think there was a time when Sainsbury's was twice the size. Now Tesco accounts for £1 in every £8 spent in a supermarket or in fact, no, £1 in every £8 spent on the high street. I think they've got about a third. I mean, things fluctuate, but they became very big, and it coincided. Dunnhumby, when Dunnhumby, the brilliant customer data business, was founded. Dunnhumby had Edwin Dunn and a partner Clive Humby. They had two meetings in the same week. One was with Boots, and they went in and they said, "We've got this way of understanding customer data, and we'd love to work with you to help you grow your company." And they said, "It's quite all right. We've got the club card; it's about to launch. Or we've got the Advantage card; it's about to launch." Yeah. And then they went to go and see Tesco, and Tesco said, "Well, we've just been asking ourselves how might we better understand our customers. It seems like you might be able to help us look at the real behaviour of our customers and reward that." I mean, that's the simple thing. It's hugely complex, right? But it's the simple thing that Tesco did. They looked at what their customers were spending, and they gave them vouchers for the things that they were buying. So they therefore bought more of them, and then they located the things that they were buying and next to other things physically that they might also be interested in. People, it's like the analog physical version of Amazon's people who like this also like this, and that's what they did. They better understood their customers, and they became the number one supermarket by an absolute country mile. And you can see other examples. I mean, I know you have international listeners, clearly podcasts do. Look at what Target done. There's the brackets apocryphal story about Target sending a leaflet to a family congratulating one of the family members on the pregnancy, In fact, it was a teenage daughter, a 15-year-old daughter, congratulating on the pregnancy, and she might want to buy some folic acid and get stock in some diapers, and the dad running, ripping this open, furiously running, going and saying, "What on earth do you think you're doing?" And then the daughter saying, "Yeah, I'm pregnant," because her buying signals were suggesting.
Wow.
So I think that big retailers, most notably Tesco in the UK and particularly Target in the States, but also Walmart and others, have been very good at understanding behavior. One of my universal principles, if I can be so not lofty, sort of slight tongue-in-cheek, but universal principles of asking smarter questions is this being open-minded. It takes me back to being a classicist, this position of the Socratic paradox, starting from the position, all that I know is that I know nothing. And if we don't bring our assumptions, our biases, our prior knowledge to the question that we want to understand, and we've got our expertise, of course we have, but if we don't bring those biases and we don't bias what the outcome is going to be to the answer, and we just say, how might we better understand our customers, brackets, and then go on to reward them for their behavior, well, you can have a transformational effect where Tesco go like that to that with Sainsbury's and do that sustainably. They're still by far the biggest retailer in the UK.
Love that. And to delve into that example a little more around those refining of those questions, because as you say, some of the question was, how do we understand our customers more and reward their behavior? But of course, it'd be very easy to then capture a load of customer data and go, brilliant, I've now got every transaction of every customer across every store. Now what? Like what questions should then a business be asking to help them make sense of all that data?
I think that very much depends on what the business is, and I don't wish to give you a fudgy answer, but I think
but we can take the retailer example, right, with loyalty cards, because for anyone listening as a business leader, imagine you're now running Tesco or whatever, and imagine this is all it's all been worked out, and you're literally presented with a spreadsheet of millions of transactions. Now what? Like what would you actually do with that data? What would be the questions to ask?
So I mean, the questions are always on one level, always the same. And I'll give you another example from a different part of Tesco. I had nothing. I may be hoary and old, but I had nothing to do with phasing out Green Shield stamps and introducing the club card to Tesco. I was still at school then. But no. I mean, the questions on one level are always the same, which is make sure that when you ask a "so what" question, you're prepared to ask them. You're prepared to go on to ask the "now what" question. So you need, as Peter Parker's uncle Ben said in Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. You must be prepared to say, okay, what do they mean? What does this mean about what our customers? How can we segment our customers into 10, 100, I don't know how many profiles. Okay, when we've done that, what are we going to do with that? What are we going to do with that intelligence? I was given a challenge for 2010. I came back from holiday, and before I was working for myself in almost the last job I'll ever have. I now realise I'm unemployable. Clearly. We got an opportunity with Tesco. They want to, it was just post the Lehman Brothers recession, the subprime recession, financial crisis. That then everyone was parking their tanks on everybody else's lawn. The Lidl and Aldi were beginning to make inroads. Waitrose was launching its essential range, its essential cave-aged Gruyere. Of course, we all know that is essential. And so they were parking tanks on one another's lawn. And Tesco had made a big investment in its finest range at the time. And they'd run a competition. And some poor intern had to manually type in the answers to two questions. What is your favourite Tesco finest product, and why? Tiebreaker, 30 words maximum. And some poor intern had typed in 30,000 of these.
Wow.
Army of interns before any kind of AI at all. And I went to go and see the food marketing director, and she said, "Look, we've got this. We want to do something with this. We don't know what we want to do with it, but can you make sense of this?" So I then spent 36 hours straight, and it was almost straight going through this. I mean, it was an Excel spreadsheet. There was nothing particularly smart about either the analytical tools or the approach, but I was looking to extract entities about what are the common. It wasn't, but what are the common things that make people like this, these products? And we did a linguistic and a frequency analysis, and it wasn't very sophisticated, but it led to an enormous campaign, and we found that it was Britishness, freshness, minimal distance from farm gate to store. There were 5 qualities, but those 3. Okay, so as a result of that, so we first came back to this is what this says, and we believe that our now what, because you are the tallest poppy, because everyone likes to take a pop shot at you, because everyone says, oh, it's bloody Tesco, what you need to do is to tell the story of the produce in your stores, not saying Tesco's got the best sprouts. What we do is we tell the story of your producers, and we make your producers the heroes. And that was an enormous award-winning campaign across all 14 categories that they had, which has been copied and aped by many, many others since, that you go in and you see in Waitrose, the farmers, right? So, I mean, I'm not saying it was a massively original idea, but it was a data analytics problem it was a data analytics challenge that led to some very chunky PR fees for this agency to tell the story of Tesco's producers. And what that allowed, for example, BBC Radio 4's food programme, was to go to the biggest sprout farmer in the UK at the beginning of December in Aberdeen and to talk for the 5 minutes. And about 3 minutes in, the vegetable buyer from Tesco was there to talk about their sprouts. I guess it was a kind of Trojan horse communication strategy, but that wouldn't have come without their willingness, 1, to collect the data, 2, to do something with the data, but 3, to have always the intention to do something with that, to go from so what to now what.
Yeah, and it strikes me that in that example, it's the fundamental insight was finding that, actually customers do care about that stuff as evidenced by the data, and that it's those stories that are going to be relevant. Whereas if that hadn't really come out, instead it was, well, it's all down to taste and so on, then to some extent it's like, it doesn't matter. They're like, the customer doesn't care which farm it comes from, the story and so on. Therefore, anything in that. So that, I think that's really interesting. As you say, it's the now what, because I think that's it's so hard to overcome, because particularly when you're overwhelmed by a lot of data and you go, okay, so what does it really tell us? And even it's an exercise that I've done in advance of collecting data, where we say, ideally we'd have data on this, or we should compile this. And then you go, okay, but what would we actually do with it? Because A, if we're not going to do anything with it, it's not worth the effort. But B, it's not even legal to collect a lot of data that you'd have no plans or clarity on what you're going to do with it. And so that's often a tricky thing to overcome. So I think, as you say, the first thing is a mindset challenge of just shifting to really pushing yourself to really think about how are you going to use this data, and what might it tell you that you can then start doing. I suppose that speaks to the whole point around the storytelling, right? It's looking at what are the stories we might get from this, and then get the data and review it and see whether are those the stories that you get, or does it come out. It also strikes me that I think the temptation with big sets of data is to immediately jump into producing visualizations of it and analysis and pivot tables and pivot charts. And it strikes me that it sounds like one of the first things you did was actually skim reading through the data itself to see what's actually said. No word clouds that are created and so on, actually reading the sorts of things that people are writing to then go, okay, now have I understood this enough that I can now run analysis to say how many times is the farm mentioned? Oh, actually not that many. Maybe I just selected a few, right? And I can see how you can then kind of do that journey. You mentioned about the kind of philosophy, and I know that you've kind of outlined your 6 golden rules of data storytelling and so on. Perhaps if you give us another example, perhaps in different sector, where perhaps a real world example of one or more of your kind of golden rules of data storytelling being applied.
It's a very small P philosophy, but and I'll always say that. Yeah, I mean, so one of them is beware the curse of knowledge. The Kahneman's opposite number at Harvard, Steve Pinker, has written a lovely book in 2014 called The Sense of Style, The Thinking Person's Guide to Writing in the 21st Century. And he has a whole chapter on the curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge is the difficulty or the impossibility of imagining what it's like for somebody else not to know something that you know, right? And it really is a curse. And when we get involved, when we do research, when we gather data on behalf of a team or a client, when we do that, we have much more knowledge than the person that's asked for it or the person that's commissioned it, and nothing is going to turn them off more if we take them through every single cross tabulation and bit of analysis that we've done and found nothing, but there's one thing over here. I'll give you an example from EasyJet. In 2016, EasyJet turned 20. I mean, who cares, really? Companies happen to be founded. And they briefed their agency and said, we're turning 20. And they didn't say, oh, yawn, yawn. They said, have you got any data? And they said, what do you mean? They said, have you got any data about your passengers? They said, well, we're only founded in 1996. All airlines are required to keep all data about all passengers forever. So, of course, we've got data. They said, brilliant, can we have it? And they said, sure. And it was pre-GDPR. I can give you two examples of why this was pre-GDPR to tell you this. Anyway, what they did was they crunched the data and they got the cumulative number of times they'd flown around the moon or to the sun and back and all those kind of things, which were sort of quite interesting. But then they said, can we look at this? Can we look at this on an individual customer basis? They said, yes, of course you can. Okay, and they basically created 12.5 million in 23 languages for 27 markets across Europe, personalized, tailored emails that said, hi, Alexis, we've been flying together for the past 8 years. We've been on 12 adventures together. Your first was to Alicante. I'm making up your holiday history, by the way. Yeah. I don't know you that well.
That's all spot on now, yeah.
Yeah, good. We've been 96,000 kilometers together. Where do you want to go next? I mean, there were more, but what they did was they didn't have the curse of the massive knowledge about everything. They had the sense to be able to look and to drill down and to create 12.5 million individual tailored customer experiences from all of this data. The campaign was incredibly successful. I don't know I can't remember what the headline was. Sadly, I don't have my own email, although I do remember it. I'll come back to that. Their email was opened twice as often as usual, but across the demographics, they got 14 times the number of bookings in the next 28 days for any comparable campaign they'd run 5 years out and for the next 2 years. And it was because it built this personal relationship, or it reinforced this personal relationship in something that had been seen as sort of brash and orange, and then it was Stelios, and it was a bit cheap and cheerful. But actually, by the time 2016, when this ran, EasyJet was the biggest flyer out of Gatwick. You know, it was the establishment. It was BA to Heathrow. But this campaign, as I say, it was pre-GDPR because my email said, well, the first bit was fine. What is it about seat 7C? You always seem to sit there. I mean, I can tell them that when they, certainly at the time, when they drop the next set of flights, they start selling from row 7 without charging you extra. So I would book into seat 7C, and I like the aisle. But the other thing they said was it must have been a family trip to Athens in 2006, because never before or since have we carried 12 people with your surname Knowles on a flight. So it was 2016, it was pre-2018, right? They couldn't have done that afterwards. But they were right, they were right. So I think that being aware of, being wary of the curse of knowledge, not showing your workings out, this isn't a maths exam, and talking in a very human way. For an airline, or the CEO of the airline, or maybe I think it was Carolyn McColl, who now runs ITV at the time. I think it was from her, if I'm getting the dates right. Anyway, for an airline to have 12.5 million individual dialogues is human dialogues about one of the most important things in their life, the holidays they go on, I think is a truly brilliant piece of data storytelling.
Yeah, I love that. It's so inspiring as well because I think partly because any business, like almost the bare minimum of data that you have is your interaction with your existing customers. Even if it's only when they started working with you and what they've done recently and so on. Most businesses will have that, and going further, you have what did they buy and how have they used it and all those sorts of things, and that's valuable information that you can surface in interesting ways. But I think, as you say, you've got to appreciate that actually your customers don't know some of those things. And I think I really like that point around the curse of knowledge, because I think that's often really hard in marketing specifically, because particularly when you're working the marketing side, you're essentially saying, right, I'm speaking to a load of people who haven't heard about us or don't know that we do this thing, except that I know us inside and out, and know that we do this thing, and know that we've spoken about doing this thing 100 different times in 1,000 different ways. And so I'm kind of fed up of doing it, and I worry that other people are too. And yet the reality is they don't know. And in fact, I share an interesting insight I got on a small amount of data today when I was running a workshop. And at the end of the workshop for our existing clients, I happened to mention, I said, oh yeah, and there's various resources that you can access. And one of which, of course, you probably already know it, but you've got the De-Stress Your Business podcast. I said, actually, out of interest, we've got a reasonably large group of existing customers here. Can you just give me a raise of your hand if you've listened to one or more episode of the podcast? And I would say it worked out as slightly less than 20%. No. And you go, wow. And the realization there was, oh yeah, we don't at all tell our customers about our podcast and things like that, but not realizing, right? Because we're cursed with the knowledge. We know it's there. We assume that people know about it. We know that most of my social media posts are about it. And yet, yeah, well, of course we don't email our customers to tell them about the podcast. It's how ridiculous. And so I think that's really, really interesting. One of the other things that that occurs to me there is when you share that story with EasyJet, is how you're talking about the connecting to that emotional side of it. That seems to be crucial. It's not just about the data-driven insights, but connecting to that emotional side. Can you talk through perhaps an example of how does a company effectively make that blend for a compelling narrative, essentially, and perhaps an example, if you've got it, of perhaps more internal within an organization rather than as part of its marketing?
Brilliant. Yes, I can absolutely do that. I'll give you two examples, both so both don't feature any data at all in the overt communication. One's a public health campaign, and one's for consumer goods, but it lives in a different space. The public health campaign is a campaign called This Girl Can, run by Sport England, an organisation which realised in about 2013 that there was a serious gender exercise gap between boys aged 14 to men aged 70 and girls and women the same, of about 2 million. Now that has closed in part in the last 10 years in England, and England actually across the UK, thanks to the increase in popularity and credibility and investment in women's football. But it's not only changed because of that, and it was kick-started by this This Girl Can campaign. They did a huge amount of work into the drags and drivers of participation in individual and team sports, and factoring out the football side of things, they found two delicious 85%. So I love it when numbers pull in opposite directions. Of those who didn't take part in regular sport or exercise, 85% said that it was for fear of being judged. And as somebody who took up running 12 years ago, and was considerably bigger at the time when I took up running, I know what they mean. It's why, it's still the legacy why I run at 6 in the morning, right? So I don't have to impose myself on my friends and family in my local town. Occasionally I see them and they say, oh God, it's nice to see you. But actually I understand that fear of being judged. But the other 85% is that almost nobody noticed anybody else exercising, even under the pandemic. People didn't notice it. But of those that do notice other people exercising, another 85%, it was a big survey they did, say that's impressive. him or her doing that, her or him doing that. That motivates me. I must do that. And people often wonder, why was there no legacy from 2012? Why did people not suddenly, 2012 was an amazing Olympics, best Olympics ever held, best, most incredible, everyone engaged, it was fantastic. Why didn't people take up sport? Well, because Jessica Ellis-Hill is a fabulous ambassador and a very aspirational figure, but so aspirational that she can do a heptathlon. Uh, we can't do heptathlons. If we can haul our bones around a field, it's hard enough. So real women really exercising was therefore the drumbeat of that campaign, which has helped to close the gender exercise gap, and it's driven by those 85% pulling in two directions. The other one is a long-running campaign, Dove's Campaign for Real Beauty, where Unilever decided they were going to take on the beauty industry from within, and they did some really interesting work, cross-cultural work in 20 markets, where they asked women to say which words they would spontaneously use to describe themselves. And they found from Turkey to Russia to India to China to US, all around the world, South Africa, they found that 2% routinely would use the word beautiful. And they determined that clearly the artificial, unobtainable, they're similar stories, but different data. Artificial, unobtainable, size zero supermodels that dominated the fashion press advertising were the wrong way to go. Hence, what they called their campaign was real types, not stereotypes. So, real women advertising their products. The campaigners had some slips along the way, some misguided elements along the way that are well documented. But that data-driven insight that many women, the vast majority of women in the world, would not use the word beautiful to describe themselves. And we want to change that. And one way that we can change that is by disrupting and changing the narrative of the beauty industry and fashion press advertising, is what led to that campaign for real beauty, and led to millions and millions, tens of millions of conversations between teens and tweens and elder relatives or role models, and a reappraisal. And look at fashion press advertising now. Look at things like the Unstereotype Alliance, that is a global initiative that has changed a lot of marketing. Not all of it, but changed a lot of marketing. That was one of the seeds of the destruction coming from within. The Dove team, they were kind of like an agent provocateur or a spark inside a chain reaction. As I say, there have been some missteps along the way, but I think that deserves praise because both of those blend emotion and rationality, I think, in a very powerful way. And for me, they're data-driven stories.
Yes, yeah, and indeed, and as you say, and yet neither of them then uses the data in the campaign, in the promotional, etc. It's just that sits underneath it all at a fundamental level, which is really interesting. I think for other business leaders, that the temptation is often to think, well, I've used data to come to this conclusion, therefore that's how I'll communicate it. It's going to be bar charts and pie charts and all these such things, and of course, it's fine for those things to exist under it, but actually what's far more important is the narrative. And so the numbers should really just come in to support the narrative where that is, but really you need to connect to the emotion behind it and what's actually being felt, which I think is really, really interesting. Shifting gears slightly then. So one of the things that is a big focus for us on the De-Stress Your Business podcast is, how do you remove the bottlenecks? How do you remove the causes of frustration and things that hold you back from scaling the business without, also having a massive increase in your workload and stress levels and all these things? Where can data help us there in businesses, because there's a huge amount of data available in businesses, but most aren't using that routinely to help them identify the bottlenecks to their growth?
I think they must start from a kind of a wrecker's perspective, from not a Luddite's perspective, but they must break down silos and tear apart fiefdoms and share data and make it both available and usable. I think they should definitely set a higher bar definition of insight. As I say, it's not just me that's frustrated with it. I come across this in because in agencies I've hung out with global multinationals, in our small currently 3-person, 3 support business. We work with global multinationals because the principals in the business have worked with global multinationals, and we still know people that work there, and then you get recommended. But we also work with national and local businesses too. But I think there isn't. It's kind of ironic. You would expect, the reason I mentioned global multinationals is that you'd expect them to have cracked both the data and the insight piece. And I think one of the reasons they haven't cracked the data piece is because a lot of them are legacy silo businesses. And so that marketing and sales and insight and new product development and then e-commerce and so on, they operate in independent fiefdoms, and they want to take credit for success. And so I think breaking down silos, banishing fiefdoms, accelerating empathy, and by that I don't mean endless soft skills training, but I think understanding the role that empathy, putting yourself into the mindset, the shoes of those who you're seeking to influence, be they customers or internal stakeholders or regulators, and understanding what their data tolerance is likely to be. One of the exercises that one of my favorite exercises. I train a lot of people in businesses. I also train through the other side of our business. It specializes in impact, but specifically in academic impact. There's a 7-yearly review cycle in the UK, but also in many other markets too, where government funding is assessed, and that is based in no small part on genuine real world impact. And training academics who, Steve Pinker, in his Sense of Style, says that academics are the worst exhibitors of the curse of knowledge. He calls out his own sort as top of the pile. But one of the exercises I love doing is called pen portrait, and we get people to draw a spidergram of, in the middle of the spidergram, they put the name of the audience that they're looking to influence. Somebody, the conference audience, the internal review committee, whoever, it doesn't matter who it is, and then draw, and then in sort of bubbles around to give defining qualities of what they're like and how likely they are to react to data. Some of those will be joined together more strongly, and some will be weaker, and then to use that spidergram, which will take them 10 minutes to do. I mean, they could spend longer, but you could do it in 10 minutes. To write 150 word pen portrait of that audience, and then print that out and stick it in their place of work. And when they're writing a presentation, an email, a sales pitch, whatever it might be, some marketing collateral, a LinkedIn post for the next 6 months, they bear that in mind. They look at it. It's always there. And I mean, I do this all the time. Every single conference, every single event that I'm going to be involved in, what's the data tolerance likely to be? How much are they likely to be able to stomach? And I think that's insight is not the same thing as empathy, but there's a lot of overlap. Being able to put yourself into the mindset, the shoes of those that you want to influence, to buy, to vote, whatever it might be. If you can do that, and I found the pen portrait exercise gets people to vocalize, because we often don't do that. We think, we got to go and pitch for I don't know, an energy business. Okay, so is that energy business OVO Energy or BP? I mean, they're different creatures. Are we talking to the finance and procurement team, or are we talking to the marketing and sales team? And it's going to be you're going to be smoothing out the rough edges. But I think it's an incredibly valuable exercise. I find it works best with academics because they're so expert and their data is very special and precious to them. But it also works very, very, very well in business too.
Fantastic, love that. And I think it's the ability to understand. I think it goes to two big parts of that. One was around as you just said, like using the empathy and understanding who you're communicating to, and then that other point you made earlier around breaking down the silos and making sure that you're sharing across the organization to help understand that. It strikes me that we've talked a lot about insight, and indeed, that's part of your company name, and indeed 13 years ago, I think it was 14 years ago, when I set up my consulting practice before setting up my software businesses, was bridging insight with the aim of how do you break down those silos? How do you support the cross team working was our whole thing, right? And it's interesting, like, even if when I look back over the journey of the last sort of 13 years, it's largely my businesses, 3 businesses, have been about how do you support better understanding of the knowledge and the sharing and break through those walls. And I think that's often one of the challenges. And I think it's exacerbated when you look at data specifically, right? Because I think a lot of people run off from data, it becomes even worse when you're then like, okay, there's marketing data, and marketing are in charge of that set of data. And then there's finance data, and only finance even have access to that data. And then there's sales, and they've got their, and it's all separate and all like, and I think a lot of the examples that you've shared today show how you can take operational data, for example, in the case of EasyJet, and turn that into something that's really powerful in marketing, and similar with Tesco Clubcard and so on. I think that's a really big insight for me is that's the opportunity, right? That's where to look, is where have you got data in other parts of the organization that could be utilized in others to really help you with the empathy and with the storytelling and so on. So that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Sam. I mean, lastly, for our listeners who are keen to leverage their data more effectively, if you were to just give one like actionable step or takeaway that you recommend that they consider today, what would it be?
Don't ask a so what question without being prepared to follow it up with the now what question. Data can be incredibly powerful in the stories that you build, but I'm not just talking about marketing communications. I'm talking clearly about marketing communications. I'm also talking about finance, procurement, and sales, and I'm also talking about innovation, insight. So those are 3 fairly chunky areas where data storytelling can have a profound impact. But if you're not prepared to do something to change your behavior, or to accelerate an existing behavior, or to do something that you used to do, but if you're not prepared to use what you find to do something different, don't bother.
Love that. Thank you, Sam. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll be sharing a variety of links in the show notes, including links to your website on Insight Agents, and also to your 3 books, Narrative by Numbers, How to Be Insightful, and Asking Smarter Questions. How else can people connect with you and learn from you, Sam?
I'm spending a lot of time these days on LinkedIn. I'm spending much less time on Twitter X, but a lot of time on LinkedIn, and finding that to be very useful and very helpful, and a great place to start interesting dialogues on this topic. I'm very, very findable on LinkedIn. I am Sam Knowles, Data Story.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you. Well, I encourage people to go and find Sam and connect. Thank you very much, Sam. And for those listening, like, if you're thinking, oh, this is amazing, and I can totally see how if I could understand and review my data and uncover the insights, it would have a huge impact, but I just don't have the time, then you need to learn how to free up a significant amount of time from the day-to-day for this. And to help with this, I'm giving you free access to a recording of a masterclass that I ran on how to free up 15 hours per week and remove the constant stress of running a business without slowing down growth. And typically people that attend that session and apply what they've learned literally save 15 hours a week within a couple of weeks of implementing it. So it's pretty phenomenal, and can free you up a lot to do a lot of insight work. You can find out more and access it at airmanual.co/webinar. But otherwise, that wraps up another data fueled episode this time of De-Stress Your Business. Massive thank you to my special guest, Sam Knowles, for sharing such valuable insights into the world of data storytelling and the art of asking the right questions. It's clear that with the answers that we seek, the growth that we aim for often lies hidden within asking the right question. And as always, the right narrative can transform data into actionable insights rather than just a pile of stuff to wade through. So for all our listeners, remember to check out Sam's trilogy on using data better. The links are in the show notes. Otherwise, hopefully you found this episode helpful and insightful. And if so, we'd love to hear from you. Share your key takeaways on social media, tag us in. Ultimately, your feedback helps us to always look to improve this podcast and make it as good as we can for you. Otherwise, lastly, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. We've got some more amazing guests lined up with practical strategies to help you de-stress your business. Otherwise, Sam, thank you so much. And everyone else, until next time, have fun.